Ruthless billionaire swore he'd never touch her. Then came the rain and the fire. Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome to Alcot Stories, where heartbreak meets healing, and every love story burns with passion, pain, and that rare magic of second chances. Tonight we bring you a tale of fire and rain, of a ruthless billionaire who swore he'd never fall for his innocent bride, until one stormy night shattered his walls and hers. But when love finally touched him, he let it slip through his fingers. Will he ever find her again? And if he does, will she still be the woman who once waited for him in silence? Grab your tea, dim the lights, and before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because tonight, no matter where you are, this story will find you. Now let's begin. The rain hadn't started falling yet, but the sky above Manhattan already wore the color of resignation. The same shade that lived in Zariah, Monroe's eyes, as she stepped out of the black car and looked up at the towering, steel and glass fortress that now belonged, at least in title, to her. Her breath caught not from awe, but from the chill in the air that mirrored the reception she knew awaited her inside. She adjusted the soft folds of her cream sari, the delicate golden embroidery catching the light like sunlight imprisoned in thread. It was her wedding day, yet not a single part of her felt like a bride. There had been no roses, no whispered promises, no stolen glances across a crowded room, only signatures inked onto cold legal pages in the quiet, acceptance of a future bartered by fathers. Inside, the Wolf estate gleamed with opulence, but warmth was a ghost and love, a stranger no one dared mention. Dominic Wolf stood by the grand marble fireplace, the flames casting a golden hue across his chiseled face, though his eyes remained glacial, unmoved by her presence, untouched by her beauty. At 31, Dominic had built a financial empire, bulldozed competitors, and crushed sentiments under the heel of logic. Marriage to him was a transaction, nothing more. She was the price of familial allegiance, a white pawn gifted to him in a deal signed with smiles but stained with silence. When Zariah entered the room, her steps gentle, he didn't move. Not a nod, not a greeting, only a glance, as if inspecting furniture delivered later than promised. "You're late," he said flatly, eyes drifting back to his phone. Her fingers tightened on the hem of her dupatta, the sting of his tone sinking beneath her skin. But she offered no protest. "The priest was delayed," she said softly, voice like velvet stretched thin. His silence returned. At the wedding, Dominic's vows were monotone, robotic, each word spoken with the precision of a boardroom announcement. Zariah repeated hers with trembling lips and a steady gaze, willing herself to believe that vows held power even when the heart refused to follow. That night, in the master bedroom that was now legally hers too, she stood beside the bed in her red bridal attire, the bangles on her wrists clinking with every tremble she tried to hide. Dominic had entered the room, removed his cufflinks, and without sparing her more than a glance, walked past her to sleep in the adjacent guest suite. No explanation, no goodnight, just a closed door and a louder silence than before. Days turned into weeks, and each one stretched thinner than the last. In front of his family, he remained cruel, correcting her with clipped words, ignoring her in conversations, even once humiliating her for mispronouncing the name of a wine at dinner. His mother, elegant and calculating, offered no comfort, while his sister smiled with veiled mockery. Yet Zariah, with her quiet grace, endured. She set the table each morning. She placed fresh flowers by his study door. She waited for thank yous that never came. At night, she would press her palm against the cold sheets on the bed, meant for two, her heart whispering prayers to a God she hoped still listened. Dominic's cruelty wasn't loud, it was meticulous. He didn't yell, he dismissed. A nod when she served his coffee, but never eye contact. A quiet exit when she entered the room. At charity galas, she walked 3 steps behind, introduced only as my wife, never Zariah. In crowds, she was invisible beside him. At home, she was a shadow, learning not to cast one. Yet every evening, she brushed her long curls, wore soft perfume, and tucked her hopes into the folds of her pillow. Not because she was weak, but because somewhere, under all that armor he wore, She believed a man lived who once knew how to feel. One afternoon she overheard him on the phone, laughing. It struck her like a slap, that he could feel joy, that he chose not to offer it to her. That night she cried for the first time since the wedding, not out of despair, but mourning for the girl she used to be. And yet every morning she rose with the sun, held her chin a little higher, and carried her kindness like a shield. She refused to become bitter. She would not let his coldness shape her spirit. In the quiet corners of the mansion, she began planting flowers, tiny bursts of color in a house built of stone. And unknowingly, without any words exchanged, those flowers began to bloom in the spaces between them. But still, Dominic remained a fortress, unfeeling, unreachable and impossibly alone. The distant rumble of thunder rolled through the night like a warning, its low growl vibrating against the walls of the sprawling wolf mansion, as if nature itself had sensed the tension, simmering beneath the polished surface of their fragile existence. Inside, silence reigned, a fragile, brittle silence that Zariah could almost taste, thick with unspoken words and bottled-up emotions. She had slipped away from the suffocating heaviness of the grand bedroom, into the sanctuary of the attached bathroom, seeking refuge from the cold distance that Dominic maintained with such unwavering precision. The water from the shower washed away more than just the day's dust. It attempted to cleanse the weight of rejection that had clung to her like a second skin since the moment she had become his wife. When she finally stepped out, her bare feet meeting the cool marble floor, the storm had broken fully outside. Rain lashed against the windows, a relentless, pulsing rhythm that filled the vast space with life. Her nightdress, a deep crimson silk, clung to her body in damp, sensuous folds, tracing every curve with the intimacy of a lover's touch. The jasmine scent that lingered on her skin was subtle but intoxicating, drifting softly through the air like a whisper meant only for Dominic. Her long, raven-black hair, still dripping from the shower, cascaded over her shoulders and down her back, falling in thick waves that seemed to absorb the dim candlelight and reflect it back with a mysterious glow. As she moved quietly into the bedroom, her eyes, wide and luminous, met his across the room. There was no mockery there, no disdain, only something raw and vulnerable, a quiet strength that challenged the walls he had so carefully built around himself. For a moment time slowed, the thunder's echo matching the sudden thud of Dominic's heart as a strange, unfamiliar warmth began to thaw the ice that had imprisoned him. The storm outside roared louder, a fierce elemental force, and inside the room, something equally wild and unstoppable stirred between them. Dominic, who had always wielded control like a weapon, found himself losing ground, drawn irresistibly toward the woman who had been nothing but a shadow in his life until this night. His breath caught as he closed the distance, the storm's electricity mirrored in the tension, sparking between their fingertips. When his hand finally brushed against her damp skin, it was a tentative touch, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt through his entire being. Zariah's eyes never wavered. She met him with a courage born from years of quiet endurance. There was no need for words. None could capture the tempest that churned inside them both. Slowly, Dominic's hands slid down her arms, tracing the delicate contours revealed by the silk nightdress, igniting a fire that burned away years of bitterness and pain in an instant. The warmth of her body beneath his palms was a revelation, a balm for wounds he had long refused to acknowledge. They moved together as if drawn by a force beyond their understanding. The storm outside, a mere echo of the passion consuming the room. In that night of stolen closeness, every barrier dissolved, every silence shattered by whispered breaths and tentative caresses that grew bolder with each passing moment. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the rain's relentless song, the heat of their entwined bodies, and the fragile, newfound hope flickering in their eyes. Dominic's lips brushed against her neck, tracing a path that left a trail of fire in its wake, awakening desires he had buried beneath layers of cynicism and control. Zariah responded not with fear, but with a tenderness that was fierce and unyielding. her hands threading through his hair as she pulled him closer, claiming a connection they had both denied for far too long. The night stretched on, a slow, burning dance where restraint dissolved into surrender, and two souls bruised by past wounds found solace in each other's arms. By the time dawn's first light crept through the rain-streaked windows, Dominic and Zariah lay tangled together. The storm outside finally spent, but the fire within only beginning to blaze. It was a night that neither of them could forget, the moment when walls crumbled, defenses faltered, and the cold, ruthless billionaire discovered the fragile beauty of a heartbreaking open. For Zariah, it was a promise whispered in the dark, a fragile thread of hope woven through the storm, that perhaps, just perhaps, love could bloom even in the harshest winter of their souls. The dawn crept quietly into the room, painting the walls with soft, pale light that felt almost cruel after the fiery intensity of the night before. In the aftermath of the storm, the world outside seemed to hold its breath, but inside, a different kind of tempest brewed, one neither Zariah nor Dominic was prepared to face. She lay awake, wrapped in the fragile warmth of his lingering touch, her heart daring to hope that the walls he had built around himself might finally be cracking, that the cold fortress he wore like armor was melting into something human. Her fingers traced the outlines of the sheets, her mind replaying every stolen moment, every silent confession in the way his eyes had softened, and every whispered caress that had spoken volumes where words had failed. She imagined a future where his icy distance was replaced by tenderness, where her silent endurance was met with the warmth she craved. But as the morning sun climbed higher, reality settled in with unforgiving weight. Dominic stirred, his blue eyes opening not with love or longing, but with a detached, almost clinical sharpness that chilled her soul. His gaze swept over her without recognition, as if the night had been a mere lapse in judgment, a fleeting dream dissolving in the harsh light of day. "We need to move forward," he said, voice void of emotion, eyes already returning to the business papers spread across the polished desk. There was no good morning, no tender glance, only the cold clarity of a man determined to bury what had passed between them. Zariah swallowed the ache building in her chest, steadying herself with the fragile threads of dignity she refused to let go. Days passed in a blur of silence and distance. Dominic threw himself deeper into his empire, his presence in the mansion reduced to brief, functional interactions that left Zariah feeling like a ghost in the house she once dreamed of calling home. Even the memory of that stormy night, the one moment when their worlds had collided in a blaze of vulnerability, began to feel like a cruel joke. Then came Genevieve Sterling, tall, elegant, with icy blonde hair and a smile that could disarm even the most guarded man. She was Dominic's white secretary, a woman who moved effortlessly through his world of glass and steel, commanding attention with a glance and demanding loyalty with a smirk. Zariah watched from the sidelines, her heart breaking in silent fragments as Dominic's eyes shifted from indifference toward desire, his hands once gentle with her now, searching for warmth in Genevieve's flawless skin. The mansion echoed with whispered rumors and stolen moments, and though Zariah spoke no word, her silence screamed louder than any confrontation could. She packed away her pain like a treasured secret, refusing to let bitterness stain the grace that had carried her this far. But then, the final blow came with the cold stroke of a lawyer's pen, Dominic's signature severing their bond. With clinical precision, a divorce decree delivered without explanation, without apology, without the courtesy of a final word. Alone but unbroken, Zariah closed the door on their past with the quiet strength of a woman who had loved deeply and endured more. In that moment, the shattered pieces of her heart whispered a promise to herself, to the girl she had once been, that she would rise again, untouched by the cruelty of a man who never learned to love. The grand hall shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off the polished marble floors, and the glittering gowns of the elite gathered to witness Dominic Wolfe's second marriage, this time to Genevieve Sterling, a woman as cold and commanding as the empire he had built. Her pale skin and platinum hair framed a face that was carved from ice, her eyes sharp and calculating, the perfect complement to Dominic's ruthless ambition. The wedding was everything the tabloids promised: extravagant, meticulously planned, a display of power and control that whispered loudly of victory and new beginnings. Yet beneath the surface of lavish gowns and champagne toasts, a different story began to unfold, one stitched with whispered doubts and uneasy silences. At first, the cracks were small and easily dismissed. A misplaced ledger here, a discrepancy in accounts there. Dominic, ever the master of numbers and control, chalked them up to oversight or clerical error, unwilling to suspect the woman who had woven herself so seamlessly into his world. But the unease grew, gnawing at him like a relentless storm. Meetings that once ran smoothly now ended with tension thick enough to suffocate. Phone calls went unanswered, and then the signs became impossible to ignore. Large sums of money vanished without explanation. Investments that once flourished began to falter, and trusted associates exchanged worried glances behind closed doors. Dominic's empire trembled not from external threats, but from betrayal within the walls he thought impenetrable. One chilling morning, the silence in the mansion was shattered by the absence of Genevieve herself. No note, no explanation, just an empty room that echoed with the ghost of promises broken. His fortune had vanished with her, swept away like dust in the wind, leaving only a hollow ache and the bitter taste of deception. The press descended like vultures, feeding on the scandal, painting Dominic as a fool, blinded by ambition and seduced by false glamour. Headlines screamed of the ruthless billionaire's fall from grace, each article chiseling away at the empire he had painstakingly built. In boardrooms and social circles, whispers of his downfall grew louder, and the man who once commanded respect now found himself the subject of pity and scorn. But it wasn't the loss of wealth that wounded Dominic most deeply. It was the betrayal of trust, the shattering of an illusion that left him raw and exposed. For the first time, he understood what it truly meant to lose something irreplaceable, something no money could buy: faith in another human being. Alone in the vast, empty mansion, he stared at the portraits on the walls, reminders of battles won and losses endured, and realized that his greatest defeat was not financial ruin, but the fracture of his own heart. It was a solitude harsher than any boardroom defeat, a loneliness carved from regret and the heavy weight of mistakes made in the pursuit of power. As the city buzzed with gossip and speculation, Dominic's mind drifted back to the woman he had cast aside, the quiet strength of the brown-skinned bride whose loyalty had been his undoing. In the wreckage of his shattered world, a seed of longing took root, fragile yet persistent, whispering of a chance for redemption, for forgiveness, and for a love that had once been lost but not forgotten. In that silence, amid the ruins of his empire and the echo of betrayal, Dominic Wolfe faced a truth he could no longer deny: the cold, ruthless life he had chosen was empty, without the warmth of the one woman who had truly seen him. In the silence that followed the storm of betrayal, Dominic Wolfe found himself haunted, not by the collapse of his empire, nor by the relentless glare of the public eye, but by memories of a woman he had dismissed as weakness, only to discover she was the strongest force in his life. Zariah, her voice soft and steady like a gentle river, echoed endlessly in the chambers of his mind, a balm against the harshness he had both inflicted and endured. He remembered the countless nights she waited quietly for him to return from his relentless work, the way she would prepare his tea without complaint, her hands trembling slightly, yet never failing in their care. It was in those small, overlooked acts of kindness that she had revealed a love so profound and pure that Dominic, blinded by ambition and bitterness, had failed to see it. Even as he had insulted her in front of family and ignored the warmth she offered, she had met cruelty with dignity, never raising her voice, never demanding more than what she freely gave. The realization cut deeper than any financial ruin. The understanding that the only woman who had ever truly loved him was the one he had cast aside like a shadow. Guilt became a relentless companion, gnawing at his conscience, stirring a desperation that no amount of power or money could quell. With every empty room in his vast mansion, with every silent corner that once echoed with laughter, now drowned in regret, Dominic vowed to find her, to seek forgiveness from the one heart he had broken. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, as he scoured every connection, every whispered rumor, following leads that felt like fragile threads in a vast, tangled web. The search was grueling, the uncertainty crushing, but the memory of her resilience, her grace fueled his determination. Then, like a beacon in the darkness, a quiet tip arrived. A small charity home nestled in a city miles away, a place where Zariah had been seen offering help and hope to those in need. The news sparked a flicker of hope that warmed his cold, weary soul. Leaving behind the trappings of his shattered life, Dominic embarked on a journey not just across miles, but through the labyrinth of his own guilt and longing. As he stood before the unassuming doors of the charity home, the weight of years of mistakes pressed down on him. But so did the fragile hope that this time he could make things right. His heart pounded not with the arrogance of a billionaire, but with the vulnerability of a man stripped bare by love lost and the aching desire for redemption. With a deep breath, he stepped inside, ready to face the woman who had once been his anchor, the only person who had ever truly seen him, and to plead for a second chance, even if all he could offer was the sincerity of a broken man seeking forgiveness. The air inside the charity home was thick with quiet purpose and soft laughter, a sanctuary far removed from the cold opulence of Dominic Wolfe's shattered world. As he stepped through the humble doors, his heart hammered with a mix of anticipation and fear, knowing that the woman he sought had transformed, not only in appearance, but in spirit. Zariah stood among the children, her posture calm yet commanding, her brown skin glowing with a strength forged from years of hardship and healing. Her eyes, though still tender and kind, now held a quiet fire that spoke of resilience and unyielding grace. Seeing her again after so much time felt like stepping into a dream that balanced on the edge of hope and heartbreak. The years apart had sculpted her into someone both familiar and new, a woman who had endured betrayal and emerged with a dignity that made Dominic's knees weaken. Without a word, he sank to the ground before her, an act so humbling, so raw it shattered the walls around his pride. "Zariah," he whispered, voice trembling with the weight of regret, "I know I don't deserve this moment or your forgiveness, but I am begging you for a chance to be the man you believed I could be, for the chance to love you the way you deserve." His eyes searched hers, pleading for a crack in the armor she had carefully built. Around them, the children watched silently, their innocent gazes filled with curiosity and hope. Zariah's heart fluttered, caught between the ache of past wounds and the stirrings of a long-buried affection. She saw the broken man before her, a man who had caused her pain, but now stood vulnerable and real. "Dominic," she said softly, her voice steady though her heart trembled, "you shattered my world once. How can I know this isn't just another moment? Another storm that will leave me in ruins again?" Her words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between doubt and possibility. He reached out, his hand steady despite the flood of emotion. "I don't expect you to forget what happened. I only ask you to believe in the man I'm trying to become, for us to start over, not as the people we were, but as who we could be." Time seemed to still around them as Zariah weighed the sincerity in his eyes against the ghosts of their past. The children's laughter, the warmth of the room, and the depth of his plea stirred something long, dormant within her, a hope that perhaps love, even broken love, could be mended. Yet trust, she knew, was not given lightly, and forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. With a cautious nod, she extended her hand, not just as a gesture of acceptance, but as an invitation to walk a new path together, one paved with honesty, patience, and the promise of healing. Dominic rose, clutching her hand as if holding the most precious treasure, aware that this moment marked the beginning of something fragile and beautiful. As they stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of life and renewal, both knew that the road ahead would test them, beyond anything they had faced. But for the first time in years, the future shimmered with the possibility of redemption and a love reborn. The path toward healing was neither straight nor swift. It wound through moments of vulnerability, quiet frustration and hesitant hope, demanding from Dominic a patience and humility he had never known he possessed. Gone were the grand, ostentatious gestures that once marked his life, the flashy displays of wealth replaced by small, deliberate acts of care that spoke volumes in their sincerity. The way he listened when Zariah spoke without interruption, the thoughtful cup of tea prepared just as she liked it, the gentle touch on her shoulder when words failed. Each day was a step, sometimes faltering, sometimes sure, toward rebuilding trust that had been fractured by pain and neglect. Zariah, too, found herself opening doors she thought permanently closed, allowing the warmth of Dominic's transformed heart to seep into the spaces once filled with cold silence. There were days when old wounds throbbed sharply, reminding them both of the fragile nature of second chances, but the resilience in her eyes mirrored the steadfast resolve in his, forging a quiet alliance against the ghosts of their past. Together, they navigated the complexities of forgiveness, learning that love was not a destination, but a continuous journey marked, not by perfection, but by the willingness to show up, to be vulnerable, and to choose each other again and again. Seasons changed, and with them came a renewal not just in the world around them, but in the garden of their fragile love. One evening, as the sky painted itself with the soft hues of twilight after a cleansing rain, Dominic and Zariah wandered through the blossoming garden, each flower a testament to survival and new beginnings. The scent of damp earth mingled with the sweet fragrance of jasmine, wrapping around them like a tender embrace. In that quiet moment, free from pretense and expectation, Zariah reached out and touched Dominic's hand, a simple gesture, charged with unspoken promises and deep affection. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, fragile yet filled with certainty. "You found me." He met her gaze, his blue eyes shimmering with emotion, the vulnerability of a man who had fought to reclaim not just a woman, but the essence of himself. "I never stopped looking," he replied softly, his words carrying the weight of every struggle, every tear and every hopeful heartbeat. In that touch, in those words, the walls they had both built crumbled away, leaving behind a love tempered by fire, strengthened by trials and cherished beyond measure. They stood together, not as the broken souls who had once lost their way, but as two hearts intertwined by choice, respect and a newfound tenderness. The future stretched before them, uncertain yet bright, illuminated not by wealth or power, but by the simple, profound truth that love, once lost, could be found again, treasured and held with the reverence it deserved. And in that serene garden, where life bloomed anew after the storm, Dominic and Zariah embraced the promise of forever, knowing that this time their love would never be taken for granted.